Dr. Rathod, let's delve into how racial prejudice is depicted in Shakespeare's Othello. What stands out most prominently in terms of racial dynamics?
Othello is subjected to intense racial prejudice as a black Moor in a predominantly white Venetian society. Characters like Iago and Brabantio use derogatory terms such as Barbary horse to dehumanize him. This reflects the 16th century European racial ideologies, where being black was associated with savagery.
It's interesting that despite his high rank, Othello faces such discrimination. Would you say his military success exacerbates or alleviates these racial tensions?
Ironically, Othello's success intensifies the resentment, especially from characters like Iago who feel threatened by his rise. This is a classic example of how power dynamics can amplify racial prejudice, as seen in the resentment Iago harbors because of Othello's status.
Such dynamics seem deeply entrenched. With the societal racism depicted in the play, is there any hope for change within that framework, or is it an inevitable cycle?
The play suggests a grim outlook where societal racism leads to tragic outcomes. However, modern interpretations often encourage a forward-looking view where acknowledging these issues can lead to societal introspection and eventual change.
Turning to Othello's internal struggle, how does internalized racism manifest in his character throughout the play?
Othello begins to see himself through the prejudiced lens of Venetian society, doubting his worth. This internalization is evident when he calls himself a toad, believing his blackness makes him inherently flawed. It's a powerful reflection of how societal views can erode self-esteem.
That self-doubt seems crucial to his downfall. Could this internalized racism be seen as a tool that Iago manipulates?
Absolutely. Iago leverages Othello's insecurities, using societal racism as a weapon to undermine him psychologically. This manipulation is a testament to how deeply ingrained prejudices can be exploited by those with malicious intent.
In a modern context, how might individuals combat such internalized racism to prevent similar outcomes?
Education and self-awareness are key. By recognizing and challenging internalized biases, individuals can build resilience against societal pressures. Programs promoting racial identity and self-worth are crucial in this fight against internalized racism.
Let's shift focus to the colonial elements in Othello. How does the play serve as a microcosm of European colonial attitudes?
Venice, as a setting, represents a colonial hub where mercantile activities underscore the racial hierarchies. Othello's attempts to integrate by adopting Venetian customs highlight the pressures on colonized subjects to conform, yet he ultimately fails due to the entrenched racism.
This failure to assimilate seems significant. Can we draw parallels to modern-day struggles of marginalized communities?
Certainly, marginalized groups today face similar challenges in assimilating into dominant cultures, often feeling pressure to conform while struggling against systemic barriers. This ongoing struggle is a reminder of the persistent nature of cultural hegemony.
Are there any historical or contemporary examples where these dynamics have been successfully navigated?
Yes, multicultural societies that embrace diversity, such as Canada, show progress. However, it's an ongoing process, requiring continuous dialogue and policy adjustments to ensure equity and inclusion for all cultural identities.
Finally, let's discuss the intersection of gender and race in Othello. How does Desdemona's relationship with Othello reflect colonial attitudes?
Desdemona's attraction to Othello's exotic nature can be seen as objectification, rooted in colonial attitudes. Her murder by Othello reinforces racial and patriarchal hierarchies, where a black man's transgression against a white woman symbolizes a breach of societal norms.
It's a complex dynamic. Do these themes continue to resonate in contemporary adaptations of Othello?
Indeed, modern adaptations like those by North African directors challenge traditional interpretations, emphasizing themes of cultural hybridity and resistance. These reinterpretations offer fresh perspectives on these age-old dynamics. They highlight the importance of diverse voices in storytelling. Future productions can benefit from embracing these perspectives, fostering a more inclusive and nuanced
In
understanding of
Shakespeare's
complex social
Othello,
issues.
the term Moor is used frequently, but there's more to it than just a geographic label. Dr. Rathod, can you explain its significance in the play?
Certainly, historically, Moor referred to North African or Muslim individuals, but in Renaissance England it signified otherness. In Othello, it's a tool to reduce him to his ethnicity, carrying negative connotations of savagery rather than his accomplishments.
This reflects broader societal anxieties, doesn't it? The term hints at the discomfort of a predominantly white society encountering new cultures through trade and colonization. Could you share an anecdote about how this played out historically?
Indeed, during the period, explorers returning from Africa often brought back exaggerated tales of exotic peoples. This fed into the stereotype of the savage Moor, much like Othello, who, despite his high rank, remains an outsider in Venice.
Yet, some argue that calling out these terms in historical texts imposes modern views on past societies. How do you address this counterargument?
While it's true that historical context is vital, understanding these terms helps us uncover ingrained biases that persist today. Acknowledging this can guide us toward a more inclusive future, challenging stereotypes in modern narratives.
Another striking aspect of Othello is the use of animalistic imagery. Dr. Rathod, what role does this play in the narrative?
The imagery, like Iago's old black ram and Barbary horse, dehumanizes Othello, drawing on common tropes that depicted black individuals as subhuman. This reflects a Renaissance trend of portraying Africans with animalistic traits.
Such language isn't just in literature. It reflects societal views of the time. Can you give a real-world example where this imagery influenced perceptions?
Absolutely. The Barbary Coast was infamous in European imagination due to piracy, reinforcing exotic and dangerous stereotypes. This imagery shaped perceptions, much like how African performers in European courts were exoticized spectacles.
Critics of this view argue that these are just literary devices without real impact. What's your take on this?
While literary devices, they mirror and reinforce societal prejudices. Recognizing their impact is crucial for dismantling harmful narratives. Today, we strive to depict diverse cultures authentically, moving beyond such reductive imagery.
Religion also plays a crucial role in Othello. Terms like the devil are used to describe Othello's blackness. Dr. Rathod, how does this symbolism function in the play?
In the Renaissance, blackness was often linked to evil, reflecting Christian theological interpretations. Othello's depiction as the devil not only dehumanizes him but aligns with a Eurocentric worldview that equates darkness with sin.
This brings to mind the moral dichotomy of the era. Do you have an example where this symbolism was manifest in historical societal attitudes?
Historically, associations between blackness and moral corruption were evident in missionary work, where converting dark souls was seen as saving them from sin. This echoes the moral dichotomy present in Othello.
Some argue this view overlooks the complexity of religious symbolism. How do we reconcile these perspectives?
We must appreciate the nuanced role religion played while critiquing its use in justifying discrimination. Moving forward, recognizing this complexity can help us build narratives that respect cultural and religious diversity.
Othello also touches on colonial themes and the fear of miscegenation. How do these themes intertwine in the play, Dr. Rathod?
Brabantio's outrage at Desdemona's marriage to Othello stems from fears of racial mixing, which were stigmatized in Renaissance Europe. The language used portrays their union as unnatural, reflecting societal anxieties about maintaining racial purity.
The fear of miscegenation seems deeply rooted. Do you have a historical scenario that highlights these anxieties?
Certainly, in the early modern period, laws against interracial marriage were enacted to preserve racial hierarchies. Such policies mirrored the fears depicted in Othello, where racial purity was equated with moral and cultural superiority. While interpretations can vary, the play undeniably reflects the colonial mindset of its time. Acknowledging these themes helps us understand past prejudices, guiding us toward a more equitable future in our
Dr.
increasingly
Rathod,
diverse
Annie
societies.
Alumba discusses how Othello is embedded in the racial and colonial ideologies of early modern England. Can you elaborate on the historical context she provides?
Certainly, Lumba situates Othello during a time when race was a fluid concept intertwined with religion and culture, not just skin color. The expulsion of Moors and Jews from Spain in 1492, alongside European encounters with Africa and the Middle East, shaped perceptions of blackness and otherness. This backdrop creates a dense tapestry for Othello's identity as a Moor, reflecting anxieties about cultural outsiders.
That's fascinating. Considering these anxieties, how does Othello as a character embody both the exotic and the threatening?
Othello is portrayed as a heroic figure yet marginalized due to his blackness. The character of Iago, for instance, uses racial slurs to villainize him, tapping into fears of miscegenation. This duality in Othello's identity highlights the precarious position of outsiders in a racially stratified society.
However, some might argue that Othello's military prowess shows a level of acceptance. How does this play into the colonial narrative?
Indeed, Othello's role as a military leader underscores his utility to Venice, much like colonial subjects. Yet his eventual alienation and downfall illustrate the limits of assimilation. Lumba's analysis suggests that despite his contributions, Othello remains inherently untrustworthy due to racial prejudices, a sentiment mirrored in contemporary racial dynamics.
Let's dive deeper into the intersections of race and religion in Othello. Dr. Rathod, how does Lumba navigate these themes?
Lumba highlights Othello's ambiguous religious identity, presenting him as a Christian convert fighting for Venice against the Turks, yet his Moorish background ties him to Islam. This duality reflects early modern England's fears about cultural hybridity and religious conversion.
Given this ambiguity, does Othello's religious background further marginalize him in Venetian society?
Absolutely. His Moorish heritage evokes fears of Islamic influence, compounding his outsider status. The play exploits these fears, portraying Othello as a cultural hybrid who threatens societal norms, which resonates with ongoing debates about religious integration today.
Yet, isn't this dual identity also part of what makes Othello a tragic hero?
True, his complex identity adds depth to his character. However, Lumba warns against romanticizing him without acknowledging the systemic racism that shapes his tragedy. This lens encourages modern audiences to reflect on how societies construct and enforce racial hierarchies.
Gender and sexuality also play crucial roles in Othello. Dr. Rathod, how does Lumba connect these themes with race?
Lumba argues that race in Othello is inseparable from gender and sexuality. Desdemona's marriage to Othello challenges societal norms, provoking outrage from characters like Brabantio. This reflects early modern fears about interracial relationships disrupting social hierarchies.
Iago's manipulation of Othello's insecurities touches on this too, doesn't it?
Indeed, Iago exploits racialized fears of miscegenation, portraying Othello's relationship with Desdemona as unnatural. This manipulation underscores the play's linkage of blackness with hypersexuality and moral corruption, an association that persists in various forms today.
Yet, could one argue that Desdemona's defiance represents a progressive challenge to these prejudices?
Certainly, her defiance is a form of resistance against rigid societal norms. However, her ultimate fate suggests the limits of such challenges in a society entrenched in racial and gendered biases. This tension continues to be relevant in discussions about interracial and intercultural relationships.
Finally, let's explore the colonial power dynamics in Othello. How does Ben Ammer's analysis complement Lumba's insights here?
Ben Ammer emphasizes Othello as a colonial construct shaped by hegemonic discourse. His identity as a Moor is both exotic and threatening within Venetian society, reflecting anxieties about race and miscegenation. This discourse positions Othello as an outsider who disrupts established racial hierarchies.
How does the play reflect these colonial anxieties through its portrayal of cross-racial marriage?
Cross-racial marriage in Othello is depicted as a site of cultural conflict. Ben Amer points out that Desdemona's union with Othello challenges Venetian norms, with accusations of witchcraft reflecting fears of black men wielding unnatural power over white women. This illustrates early modern anxieties about miscegenation. Othello's downfall underscores the limits of assimilation within a racially biased society. While he embodies the benefits of colonial subjects, his ultimate alienation highlights inherent distrust due to his race. This critique remains relevant today as we navigate post-colonial power
Dr.
structures and
Rathod,
racial
in
dynamics.
Jayatsna Singh's work, how do colonial narratives shape the portrayal of India in British literature?
Singh argues that colonial narratives often depicted India as an exotic and subjugated other. These portrayals weren't objective, rather they were colored by European biases and imperial agendas, much like how a photographer might use a filter to alter reality.
Interesting analogy. However, couldn't one argue that these narratives provided a necessary cultural exchange?
While they did spark curiosity, they often reinforced stereotypes rather than facilitating genuine understanding. For instance, 17th-century travelogues romanticized India but ignored its complexities.
Given this context, how do you see these narratives affecting contemporary post-colonial literature?
They've left a lasting impact. Modern writers often grapple with these lingering stereotypes, striving to reclaim their narratives by painting a fuller picture of their cultures and histories.
Singh's analysis of Shakespeare is quite profound. How did his works justify British colonialism?
Shakespeare was often used as a symbol of European superiority. During the British Raj, his works were touted as pinnacles of culture, implying that British rule brought civilization to the colonized, much like an artist claiming their style as the definitive form of art.
Yet, isn't Shakespeare's work also seen as a critique of power and race, especially in plays like Othello?
Certainly, Othello reflects early modern anxieties about race and cultural difference, portraying the Moor's dual role as both a threat and an asset. It's a complex dance between admiration and fear.
Could this duality in Othello be why his work remains relevant in post-colonial studies?
Absolutely. Othello's themes resonate with the struggles of identity and power, mirroring the experiences of colonized societies striving for autonomy and acceptance.
Let's delve into the intersection of race, gender, and empire as seen in Othello. How does Singh address these themes?
Singh argues that colonial discourse often feminized colonized lands, as seen in Othello's marriage to Desdemona, which symbolizes Europe's romanticized but fraught relationship with its colonies.
Some might say Othello's downfall is purely personal. How do you counter that assertion?
While personal elements exist, Othello's tragedy is deeply intertwined with societal racism and imperial power dynamics. His noble yet alien status epitomizes the colonized individual's struggle for identity and acceptance.
How do these themes play out in today's globalized world?
They remain pertinent. As societies become more interconnected, the challenge is to navigate cultural differences without perpetuating historical power imbalances.
Panda and Salmonterry view Othello through a post-colonial lens. How does this perspective alter our understanding of the play?
They argue Othello critiques European imperialism by exposing the dehumanizing effects of colonial ideologies. Othello's identity crisis mirrors the post-colonial struggle between native culture and colonial influence.
Could Othello be seen as a bridge between pre- and post-colonial thought? And how might Othello inform future cultural dialogues?
It encourages a reevaluation of historical narratives, urging both scholars and artists to explore new interpretations that challenge traditional power structures and
Dr.
embrace
Rathod,
cultural
many
hybridity.
scholars have applied post-colonial theory to Shakespeare's Othello. Could you start by explaining how Edward Said's concept of the other relates to Othello's character?
Certainly, Said's Orientalism, though not directly about Othello, provides a lens to see Othello as an exotic outsider in Venetian society. This framework shows how he's both feared and fascinated by Europeans, reflecting colonial anxieties.
That's intriguing. However, doesn't this view risk oversimplifying Othello's complexity by focusing solely on his outsider status?
It can, yet Said's theory is a foundation for understanding Othello's marginalization. The play's nuance lies in its depiction of his struggles beyond mere exoticism, which is where other scholars like Homi Bhabha expand the analysis.
Speaking of Bhabha, how do his concepts of hybridity and mimicry deepen our understanding of Othello's identity crisis?
Bhabha's idea of hybridity illustrates Othello's attempts to blend into Venetian society. However, his mimicry is never fully accepted, hinting at the impossibility of true integration, highlighting racial hierarchies that persist even today.
Let's delve deeper into Bhabha's theory. How does Othello's character embody cultural hybridity?
Othello's marriage to Desdemona is a classic example. It symbolizes his desire to assimilate, yet his racial identity prevents full acceptance. This mirrors Bhabha's hybridity, where Othello is caught between worlds, unable to belong to either.
However, some argue that Othello's tragedy is more personal than political. Does this diminish the postcolonial critique?
It's a valid point, yet personal and political realms in Othello are intertwined. His personal downfall is steeped in societal rejection, showing how individual identity crises reflect broader racial hierarchies.
Given this complexity, how can these themes inform modern discussions on race?
They urge us to recognize persistent racial barriers. By examining Othello's experiences, we see the continuing struggle for identity in multicultural societies, highlighting the need for genuine inclusivity beyond superficial acceptance.
Frantz Fanon's work on internalized racism is often applied to Othello. Could you elaborate on this connection?
Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks discusses how colonized individuals internalize oppressors' views. Othello internalizes Venetian society's racist ideologies, leading to his self-doubt and, eventually, his self-destruction.
Some might argue Othello's downfall results from personal flaws rather than societal pressures. How do you respond to that?
While personal flaws are undeniable, they are exacerbated by societal rejection. Fanon's perspective highlights how Othello's internal conflict stems from his inability to reconcile his identity with imposed racist stereotypes.
How can Fanon's insights be applied to current identity struggles?
Fanon's work encourages us to question how societal norms shape self-perception. Understanding Othello through this lens can help modern individuals combat internalized prejudices and embrace diverse identities without fear.
Paul Brown's analysis, although focused on the Tempest, influences readings of Othello. How do colonialist ideologies manifest in these plays?
Brown highlights how Shakespeare's works reflect colonial narratives, portraying non-European characters as both subjects of intrigue and subversion. Othello exemplifies this duality, embodying both the feared outsider and the tragic hero.
However, could this interpretation risk reinforcing stereotypes instead of critiquing them?
It's a delicate balance. While some readings may inadvertently reinforce stereotypes, others uncover Shakespeare's critique of colonialism, offering space for alternative narratives and resistance against dominant ideologies.
Looking forward, how can these analyses guide future interpretations of Shakespeare's work?
They encourage us to view Shakespeare's plays as dynamic texts. By applying postcolonial lenses, we can continually reinterpret them to reflect evolving understandings of race and identity, ensuring their relevance in contemporary discourse.
Let's start by discussing Othello's characterization as the other in Venetian society. How does postcolonial theory shed light on this aspect of his identity?
Othello, as a Black Moor, embodies the concept of the other. He's celebrated for his military prowess yet remains an outsider due to racial prejudices. This duality mirrors colonial ideologies where non-Europeans were exoticized but deemed inferior.
It's intriguing how Othello's military success coexists with his marginalization. Could you elaborate on how early modern anxieties about race and colonialism play into his characterization?
Certainly, Zaid Ben Amr suggests that Othello's depiction taps into European fears of racial and colonial disruption. Despite his achievements, he reflects a colonialist hegemonic discourse. This highlights the complex interplay between admiration and exclusion.
Yet, some argue that Othello's integration into Venetian society was possible. Is there a counter-argument to the notion of him being perpetually marginalized?
While his marriage to Desdemona suggests partial assimilation, it's ultimately limited by societal norms. This tension underscores the play's critique of colonial power dynamics, where ultimate acceptance remains elusive even for the most accomplished.
Moving on, let's dive into how racial stereotypes shape Othello's narrative. How do characters like Iago and Brabantio contribute to this through their language?
Iago and Brabantio employ dehumanizing imagery, calling Othello a Barbary horse or black ram. Such language reflects deeply ingrained racism, reducing him to animalistic stereotypes prevalent in 16th-century Europe.
Othello's internalization of these stereotypes is pivotal. Could you provide an example of how this affects his psychological state?
Othello begins to doubt his self-worth, succumbing to the very stereotypes society imposes. His unraveling is a tragic embodiment of internalized racism as he fulfills the violent expectations of those around him.
Some scholars argue that Othello's downfall is more a result of personal flaws than societal prejudice. How do you respond to this?
While individual flaws play a role, they're exacerbated by societal pressures. It's the intersection of personal and external factors that drives his tragic fate, highlighting the insidious nature of internalized racism.
Let's explore Venice as a microcosm of colonial power structures. How does Othello's role within this society reflect broader colonial dynamics?
Othello's military rank elevates him, yet his racial identity keeps him on the periphery. Venice exploits his skills while maintaining rigid racial hierarchies, mirroring colonial society's dichotomy of use and exclusion.
Desdemona's marriage to Othello challenges these norms. How does this relationship illuminate the limits of assimilation for colonized subjects?
Their union exposes societal boundaries. Even love can't transcend entrenched racial barriers, highlighting the play's critique of the illusion of assimilation. Their relationship underscores the precariousness of Othello's acceptance.
Some argue that Othello's high status disproves the rigidity of racial hierarchies. How do you address this perspective?
His status is conditional, dependent on his utility to Venice. The moment he steps outside prescribed roles such as marrying Desdemona, the fragility of his position is starkly revealed, affirming the persistence of racial hierarchies.
Finally, let's discuss Othello's use of language as a marker of cultural hybridity. How does his eloquence reflect his attempts to assimilate into Venetian society?
Initially, Othello's eloquence distinguishes him as noble, a bridge to Venetian culture. However, under Iago's manipulation, his speech deteriorates into violence and self-doubt, symbolizing his struggle between two worlds.
This linguistic shift is intriguing. Can you share an anecdote illustrating how Othello's dual identity impacts his interactions?
Consider his defense before the Duke. His articulate self-presentation contrasts with later scenes where doubt clouds his judgments. This shift reveals the internal conflict of navigating cultural hybridity amidst prejudice. Language initially empowers Othello, but as societal pressures mount, it becomes a reflection of his internal turmoil. His unraveling speaks to the challenges of maintaining a cohesive identity in a fragmented cultural landscape,
where we delve into the intricate comparisons of race and caste prejudices as depicted in literature. Dr. Rathod, how do texts like Othello and Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable offer insight into these themes?
These works offer a rich tapestry of social commentary. Othello explores racial prejudice through its tragic hero, while Untouchable lays bare the caste discrimination in India. Both highlight systemic hierarchies in society.
Indeed, but how do these structural similarities aid our understanding of such prejudices today?
By examining these parallels, we see how deeply ingrained social stratification perpetuates inequality. This understanding is crucial for modern contexts where similar biases persist globally.
However, some argue that these comparisons oversimplify cultural nuances. How do you address this counterargument?
That's a valid concern. Yet, in postcolonial studies, highlighting these intersections helps us question and dismantle oppressive structures, prompting us to rethink cultural narratives.
Looking forward, how could these insights guide future research in postcolonial literature?
They encourage a more nuanced approach to examining texts, pushing scholars to explore intersections of race, caste, and other identity markers in a global context.
Let's transition to regional adaptations of Othello. Dr. Rathod, how do North African and Indian interpretations offer new perspectives on this classic play?
Tunisian directors like Tawfik al-Jabali reinterpret Othello by focusing on cultural hybridity and post-colonial narratives, while Indian adaptations often intersect caste with colonial themes, adding layers of complexity.
Fascinating. Could you provide an example of how an Indian adaptation uniquely approaches these themes?
In Indian cinema, adaptations often depict Othello as a figure struggling not only with race but also with caste dynamics, as seen in Bollywood interpretations where caste plays a pivotal role in the narrative.
However, some critics argue these adaptations might dilute Shakespeare's original intentions. What's your take on that?
While it's true that adaptations reinterpret the source material, they also allow for the exploration of contemporary issues, making Shakespeare's work relevant for today's audiences.
How do you foresee these adaptations influencing future productions of Othello globally?
They pave the way for more intercultural dialogues, encouraging directors worldwide to explore and incorporate local contexts and issues into classic narratives.
Shifting gears, let's discuss intersectionality in Othello. Dr. Rathod, how does the intersection of religion, gender, and race manifest in the play?
Othello's ambiguous identity, straddling Christianity and his Moorish heritage, adds a complex layer to the racial and gender dynamics, with Desdemona's role further complicating these intersections.
Could you share an anecdotal example of how Desdemona's perception of Othello influences these dynamics?
Desdemona's fascination with Othello as exotic reflects a colonial mindset, where her perception is shaped by cultural and racial stereotypes that are still relevant today.
Critics might argue that focusing on these intersections detracts from the play's primary themes. How do you respond?
Understanding these intersections enriches the narrative, revealing how intertwined social identities shape characters' experiences and actions, making it more relevant for contemporary analysis.
What future research directions do you envision for exploring intersectionality in Othello?
Future studies could delve deeper into less explored intersections such as economic factors to better understand the multifaceted nature of identity in post-colonial contexts. Fanon's theories on internalized racism reveal Othello's psychological turmoil as he absorbs Venetian prejudices, leading to his tragic downfall. It's a poignant exploration of identity and self-perception. While psychoanalysis is one lens, it opens up critical discussions about identity and power. Balancing it with other interpretations offers a more comprehensive understanding of the play. It encourages a deeper examination of character motivations and societal influences, prompting scholars to explore new theoretical frameworks in post-colonial studies.